as you said earlier, why wouldn't they go into these spaces if that's what they're getting?
If this is
And
the
again,
only safe place.
Neither one of us are saying that we want them to stay in spaces where they're getting misogynistic messaging or messaging that is detrimental in any way. Neither one of us are floating that idea for a second. But I think we both understand something more nuanced, which is that boys are going there sometimes for really valid reasons of deeper needs that they have that are not being met anywhere else.
Welcome back. Today on Raising Men, we're joined by Andrew Reiner. He's a teaching professor, a cultural critic, and he's one of the leading voices examining the emotional lives of boys today. He's a teaching professor at Towson University. He's the author of Better Boys, Better Men, The New Masculinity That Creates Greater Courage and Emotional Resiliency, and the upcoming book, Boys Reconnected, The Growing Epidemic of Alienation and How to Stop It. He's written extensively about masculinity and boys' issues and men's issues, particularly mental health. He's written extensively for the New York Times, Washington Post, Boston Globe, and as well as for the NZ Herald and La Repubblica, among other publications. Andrew, welcome to Raising Men.
Thanks, Shaun. It's really great to be here.
It's great to meet you. I'm so excited to have this talk with you. Let me get you just started by saying, you've said that boys are falling through the cracks these days, and I could not agree more with this. It's part of the founding hypothesis of this entire project for me. What makes you say that, and why is it happening right now?
Yeah, I mean, those are two great questions to start off with. It definitely is happening now. There are basically two schools of thought really kind of predominating in the public conversation. One of them is basically that boys are failing. The extreme of that boys are really failing. The other one is that boys are doing fine. They're damaged goods, but they're doing just fine, thanks. And we need to stop saying that boys, we need to put the spotlight on boys because it really doesn't belong on them. It belongs somewhere else. That's a whole nother conversation. I tend to fall somewhere that's about 2/3 over to the failure side. Ever since I finished my last book, the thing that really kind of tipped me off, Shaun, was that at the very end of the research for my last book, I started talking to older boys and young men. And one of the things I kept hearing was just this through line was that they were struggling with their mental health. That was not at all something that we were talking about at all as a culture. The other thing that I started hearing was that this idea of independence was a much bigger problem for them. They didn't really call it, independence, but the ways that they were really wearing this idea of independence were breaking them down because they had this extreme notion that they had to do everything on their own or they were falling short. This transcended race. It transcended sexuality, because every young man that I spoke to then and since then has really spoken to a lot of these same themes. And then the other thing I started realizing when I started really putting together a proposal for the book I'm working on now is that in the classroom, and this really starts pretty much at about anywhere from kindergarten to really, maybe second or third grade, and then it goes all the way through high school. And actually, if young men go on to college, it happens there too, where they're completely falling through the cracks in the educational system. And the conversation when I was working on my first book, and really since then, has very much been, well, it's a problem with toxic masculinity. That's the problem. The problem is toxic masculinity, the way they're being taught to be men. And to some extent, I really kind of spoke to this in my first book as well. It's that the script we've been handing boys has been flawed, and the ways as a result that they're engaging with education because of this script is that it really undermines their ability to want to really learn. And there is some truth to that. There absolutely is some truth to that, but it also goes deeper than that.
Yeah.
And boys are falling through the cracks on every metric of education. And again, it starts, the latest it typically starts is early elementary school, but it goes all the way through high school. And we're seeing it in college too, because what we're seeing in college is we all know that young men are far less likely to want to attend college today. And there's reasons for that, which we could get into later. But the other thing is that when they're there, they're falling through the cracks.
Mm.
They're not attending classes nearly as much as their female peers. They're not getting the grades that their female peers are getting. Here's a really great example. I came across a really telling study, which was that the one area that a lot of educators say that boys and young men are still excelling in are the STEM classes, right? The science, the math, the engineering. That's not the case, because at the college level in America, the girls and young women proportionally that are in those majors are doing better grade-wise than their male peers proportionally.
Wow.
And to me, that alone is a great example of what we're talking about. And it's not that, in no way does this take away from the successes, the fantastic successes of girls and young women, because they deserve all credit for that. But what it does to me is it says that there's a problem. That the boys and the young men aren't keeping pace.
Yeah.
And this is also happening, by the way. We're seeing these upward ticks at the graduate school level as well. Law schools, medical schools, and other graduate programs, we're seeing increasingly less and less males going on to there as well. And
Mm.
so, the reason I bring up education, Shaun, as such an important place is because, I mean, that's the job, right? Of all kids, regardless of gender. That's their job when they're young. That's the
Right.
place where we have to look to see, are they thriving or are they struggling? And for boys, it's the latter. But it's happening for them with mental health, as I mentioned a few moments ago. Um, Boys and young men are far more anxious and depressed than we've really been led to believe. And I've been finding this out for years in the second book that I'm working on with the research. And a big part of that is because the metrics we've been using to gauge anxiety and especially depression in males is different than what they really need to accurately assess whether or not they're depressed, for instance.
Hmm.
And so, um, a lot of probably the area of mental health that boys and young men are struggling with the most is anxiety.
Yeah, I
But
can
when we
imagine.
talk about depression, there still is this belief, and you can find this if you just Google it, this notion of that the proportion of females to males who are depressed is the same as anxiety. It's like 2 to 1, or with anxiety, it might even be a little bit higher.
Mm.
But when you use metrics that better gauge more accurately depression and how it manifests in males, which typically is different than in females, that gap narrows dramatically. And in some studies, has actually shown that males proportionally can, when the metrics are used that are accurate, can actually be a little bit more depressed than a lot of females.
Mm.
And that doesn't surprise me, because when all we have to do is look at the suicide rates,
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
right? I mean, that's a whole other conversation, but
Yeah.
that speaks volumes right there in terms of how it can translate into suicide rates, addiction rates.
Yeah.
Um,
And just for the people who are listening who are not as aware of this as you and I are, what are the suicide rates in men compared to women?
right. The suicide rates on average are 3 to 1, male to female.
Yeah.
And they go up even higher in certain age brackets.
Yeah.
So for instance, in older boys and young men, when you're talking about, I think it's 15 to 24,
Yeah.
it's 3 to 1. Males are that much more likely to commit suicide.
Mhm.
And a lot of women will say, well, but yeah, but more, there are a lot more young women who are unfortunately are attempting suicide. Absolutely. And that's a huge problem.
Yeah.
But when you take that a step further and you look at the ability to take your own life and to see it through all the way, that's something that's a whole different beast entirely that you have to look at.
Yeah,
And when
it's
you get,
terrifying.
and that gets even higher. It gets even a little bit higher for men when they reach middle age.
Yeah. It doesn't surprise me at all, and it's terrifying. And, you know, so much of the rhetoric around this and so much of what you hear in the online discourse and all of that, it it sets the entire discussion up as this win-lose situation. And you just enumerated it. You say, "Oh, but, the girls are struggling in this other way," or whatever it is, or this is it's almost like the unconscious argument is that this cost to our young men is worth it because the young women who really haven't had the kinds of opportunities that men have historically in our culture and all of that, which is true, they're getting better, and so it's worth this cost. And that's not the case. And it's almost not the case in most human endeavors. It's hardly ever a win-lose thing. There is usually a win-win construct. And the fact is that if young men aren't thriving, then young women aren't going to thrive as much as they could either. And it's all this in our society is not going to thrive the way that we need it to. And so
Absolutely.
this part of the entire nature of the problem here is that we're culturally inclined to gauge these things in this win-lose mentality, and we have to cure people of that affliction. It is not a win-lose thing. It is a win-win thing. There is no reason our young men can thrive and our young women can thrive, and when we do as a culture and as a society, we thrive.
Absolutely. The thing that I've been saying for years, Sean, is, it's a zero sum equation, which is exactly what you're talking about. And the way that I've always phrased it is that, the way that we're talking about boys and girls, young men, young women, it's very much this either or proposition that if girls, right, that if boys are struggling, then that's going to take away the spotlight from girls and what they need. And they are doing so much better in so many ways. Not always, of course, because we know
Yeah.
about mental health as one big area, obviously, and we
Yeah.
can't get away from that. But across the board, there is a greater lack of resiliency in boys than there is in girls. But I always say, when you look at it and you say it's an either or proposition, one has to rise at the expense of the other, then as you said, that's going to have ripple effects that affect us all across the board culturally, not just in terms of gender. It's got to be a both and, because that's really what it is. What we're talking about here is a both and proposition
Hmm.
that, it's we're all, inextricably entwined. And really, this really speaks, of course, to a much larger conversation about who we are as a culture, because we very much are at that kind of zero sum equation of that
Yeah.
one has to excel at the expense of the other. There was a young man I interviewed who's 15, Sean, 15, who said to me, I sit there in class and I hear all these young women talking about all the problems of boys and men, and how they're constantly, so many of the problems in our culture is all because of boys and men. And he said, I sit there and I just think, you know, how helpful is it to say that one group, in this case girls, has to advance at the expense of boys and men?
Right.
And it just sums it up so beautifully, kind of where we are right now in the conversation.
Yeah. So talk to me about your new book about alienation. What's the nature of that? How does it come about?
Sure. Yeah. Well, so many of the factors that I talk about in the book, in terms of alienation, really ultimately lead to a decrease in resiliency.
Yeah.
But in terms of the alienation, what we're talking about first and foremost is that it's true, absolutely, that boys and young men are falling through the cracks in many ways in the education system, and it's especially true. Really think in a lot of public schools. Um, and that's a much bigger conversation, because one of the things I find when I do work with boys' schools, for instance, is that you don't see that problem there, right? Part of it, of course, is the socioeconomics, right? You've got parents who can afford to send their boys to these schools,
Sure.
and they're getting the kind of support systems that they need, right? Um, but when you also talk with boys in co-ed private schools, there is a little bit more of a disconnect than boys are experiencing in all boys schools. And when you get to the public schools, it's even more so.
Yeah.
So right off the bat, one of the things that you're getting in terms of boys is a feeling that because when there are conversations in a lot of schools, there often are very kind of covert and overt messaging that, as that young 15-year-old male said, that they get in the classroom that often happens in passing. You know, these passing comments about toxic masculinity, these comments about, um, that all boys and young men are predators, which is a whole, which really is a kind of prevailing message more and more. But there's lots of messaging that boys get in schools that really make them feel that this is not a place where I really feel that I can and should extend myself. Because what happens with boys, and this is not as true with girls, and research shows this, is that, and this, a lot of times with boys, when they start to struggle, they pull away. They
Mhm.
pull away, and then they basically just kind of, they fall through the cracks or they implode.
That's
And
such an interesting point because I think culturally we send the message to boys, as you mentioned before, we send the message to boys that they're responsible for solving their own problems. And to look for community is to be weak and to express inability or difficulty, to be vulnerable really is a sign of weakness as well. And so, of course, they're gonna turn inward, right? And the message to girls is, "No, no, no, you have your community. We're here for you," kind of thing. And that second thing, though, "You have a community, we're here for you," message is a way more powerful way to live your life.
oh, it's the way.
Yeah.
It is italicized. It is the way to live your life. And you're exactly right, Sean. What happens, and there was a great small sample study, there were two of them that both touched on similar dynamics that you're talking about. One of them was that when the freshmen and early sophomore young males were struggling, they would pull back, they'd stop going to classes, they'd stop getting in assignments. And what happened is that when their professors or administrators would reach out to them and say, "Hey, we've got to get you back on track. Um, and these are some things that you can do." They wouldn't do them. And another study found that a big part of the reason for that was exactly what you're speaking to, is that they did not have what I call a safety net. They
Mhm.
did not have a community safety net that they would turn to. I'm not even talking about a counselor, a therapist. I'm talking about going to other friends and getting some of the strokes that they need to
Yeah.
feel you can do this. And
Yeah.
and if you need me to check in with you to make sure that you're going to class, you're doing okay, I'll do that.
Yeah.
And the study showed that when girls and young women were also academically struggling, they would get help from their professors.
Hmm.
They would do what they needed to do to stay on track.
Yeah.
And to add to that, they had that safety net. They were so good, as you said, at creating and maintaining these safety nets. And the big secret, which clearly you understand as well, which shouldn't be a secret, is that when we have communities, when we have these safety nets, we thrive.
Yeah.
It doesn't
No
matter
question.
what you're talking about. You can be talking about sports as well. It's
Yeah.
the same thing. When we have these safety nets of community, of people where we can go and give the support and receive it, we thrive. And that is a telltale aspect of resiliency. And so when we talk about alienation, Sean, that's one of the big areas.
Mhm.
And so what happens is that, you know, a lot of boys and young men, another area of their lives that they struggle with in this day and age, and this is a complex one, is dating. If they're heterosexual.
Sure.
Um, because a lot of boys and young men, and I've heard this for a couple of years now, really have a lot of questions, in the post Me Too era, of what's safe and what's not safe, and a lot of
Right.
confusion.
Right.
And they don't have places they can talk about this.
Right.
They don't have anybody that's willing to talk about with them. And the times that there have been conversations, they often have felt that they've been shut down, that they should know the answers to a lot of these questions, which they clearly
There are people that are perfectly willing to have the conversation with them. People like Andrew Tate. That guy's
Exactly,
thrilled to have
right,
the
exact
conversation.
right, right, the last people we want to be
Yeah,
having conversations with these
that's
guys.
exactly right. And the message they're gonna get is women are trying to put you down, women are trying to control you, women are evil, women are, I mean, that's not the message that's that's a grift, by the way. It's not a
Absolutely.
message that's not a good message. It's not a
No,
message that you wanna be living your life by.
it's not at all, and they've got the and it's something that a lot of one of the things I did this survey, what's on our minds, and in this survey that I gave to older high school and young college men, one of the things I asked them at the end was to say, some kind of something you wish you would hear from the adults in your lives that are close to you,
Mhm.
and quite a few of them said that they wish that people would tell them that they're going to find love, that they will find that they're okay, they're enough as they are to be a partner with somebody.
Mhm.
Now, that to me really kind of stopped me dead in my tracks
Yeah.
because that's the kind of thing that a lot of boys and young men absolutely care about. And there was a study from Pew which found that the majority of respondents who were high school juniors or seniors of boys, I think it was like in the 70s or 80%, did have this notion of wanting to be married when they were older.
Mhm.
And that number for number for the young women, was down in the was under 50%, well under 50%. I think it was 37%.
Wow.
So, and part of the problem with that is that the messaging we still have around heterosexual relationships is that they don't serve girls and women. And that's all, that's an important reason why they should feel empowered and not feel this pressure to have to do that. Of course, we don't want anybody to feel pressured, let alone women, to feel that they have to be in relationships.
Sure.
But that's not always the message that they're getting. A lot of the message they're getting is that they shouldn't be getting into relationships because they are problematic. They're too much drama with guys, and they're going to be the ones who end up losing in this equation. And that's not the kind of conversation that a lot of people want to have, and I completely understand that. But when you talk to boys and young men, a lot of them are very self-aware, they're very thoughtful, they're very caring. These are not the kind of guys who want to get into relationships and want to be, want to be millstones around any girl or young woman's neck. They want to be partners. And
Yeah.
they're very capable of saying as much. So I think that there's a kind of subtext to what's going on in this kind of chasm that's created in the need to have intimate relationships. And I think that some of the messaging that's out there really overlooks the changing dynamics that are happening for boys and young men who are very happy to level up and want to be in relationships and want to be good partners, but a lot of them don't feel that they're getting that chance. And that, by the way, is a trend that's happening for a lot of older men too. It's not just for younger boys and young men.
I want to say something provocative here, and I want to get your feedback on it. And that is that I can imagine that the the women's outlook on that is rational in the sense that they look around and I could imagine that they see a shortage of suitable mates for
Absolutely.
whatever
Yep.
reason.
Yeah.
And like that's because I mean, I believe that we're undergoing a masculinity crisis right now. That men are forgetting how to be men, and um, and it's been going on long enough so that a lot of young men these days they're really just boys in man costumes. And so if I'm a 28-year-old woman right now looking around at the various possibilities, I don't need a husband to I mean, I might want one. I might because I'd like a mate also, but frankly, that's not something I really need all that much to get what I need out of life. Maybe it
Absolutely.
was in the '50s, but it's not
Sure.
today. And
Yeah.
so I'm not gonna sign up for that. And I think that there are a bunch of 28-year-old boys that are sitting around being like, man, I really want to be that for that person, but I don't know how. And so we've got this real structural problem around. And by the way, young men have a shortage of opportunities to demonstrate excellence, to demonstrate the kind of masculine virtues that women see and are attracted to and want, that make them want to be part of their lives. And so it's, what do we do about that? What do we do, and how do we train our boys to break through that cycle?
Yeah, and I agree with a lot of what you're saying. Just, what I was speaking to earlier, I know, it could sound provocative, and that's not at all my intention. I mean, I agree, as I just said a moment ago, with a lot of what you're saying. I think there are a lot of young women out there who are open to the idea of possibly being in a relationship. Um, and they feel that a lot of the young men out there just really aren't viable candidates at all, for a lot of the reasons, they just they can't check off on the checklist for in a
Yeah,
lot of areas. And I do think there absolutely is truth to that. Like you talked about in terms of income, right? Education, work ethic. I mean, these are all very understandable reasons that a lot of young women would say, okay, well, hold off, buddy. You don't measure up in these areas that are really important to me. And that, of course, makes perfect sense.
yeah,
But I also do think that there is a bit of a backlash right now, that
I agree.
that there is a bit of a backlash, as well as that doesn't really get talked about, that I think is important, that a lot of boys and young men sense and feel like, what's the point of bringing it up, because I'm just going to get attacked. That's one of the things I hear from a lot of older boys and young men. Why, when I hear, guys being trashed in my classes, toxic masculinity this, toxic masculinity that, why should I speak up when when either I have in the past or I've seen other guys do it, and they just get cut down, sometimes even by the teachers?
Mhm,
What's the point?
mhm.
And I get that.
Yes.
So that what happens is that they really kind of retreat.
Yeah,
They're
this is the
pulling back.
vicious cycle,
It is,
right?
it is. So it's a bit complicated because, as you said, there are some really important, really viable reasons why a lot of young women are hesitant to be in relationships with a lot of guys that they feel that aren't really measuring up.
Yeah,
And that said, there also is a bit of an anti-male bias that's pervasive right now,
yeah.
that really does, I think, really send the message that you really don't need a guy at all. It's
Mhm.
really unimportant, because you've got a great career, you've got a dog, you've got your girls to, to go on trips with, and to go out and have your girls night out with. Why do you need a guy?
Yeah.
And I think there really is a lot of that mentality that's pervasive, that I think is a different part of the equation that doesn't get discussed enough at all.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with you, and again, I mean, like you said, it's a vicious cycle in the sense that there's not enough masculinity out there, so the women look around, they don't see what they're looking for, but then the instant any boy sticks his head up and tries to assert masculinity in the way that 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 he wants to do it, he gets shot down. All the other boys see that happen, they're like, "I don't want that to be me," because we're, like, kind of culturally really, really insensitive to the fact that boys need to be able to cultivate their masculinity in a healthy way, and there are unhealthy ways to cultivate masculinity, and if we don't allow them to cultivate it in a healthy way, they will cultivate it in secret in an unhealthy way,
Absolutely.
and culturally, the backlash that you're talking about is creating a situation where they're not able they don't feel comfortable doing it in a healthy way because of the of that backlash you're talking about. So, of course, we're just gonna drive them into the arms of people who are grifting on them, trying to get them to cultivate their masculinity in an unhealthy way. And I got news for you, that's doing a lot of damage to our society.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, that really, I really feel like it's such a natural segue to talk about the manosphere right now, because that's really where we're heading,
That's exactly where I was gonna go next, the
Right.
manosphere
I mean,
and
you'd
then
be crazy
devices and
not
social
to,
media.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, Sean. It's exactly what what you just said is exactly what I think is happening very much with the manosphere. Because, when I would interview older boys and young men for this book, my next book, one of the things I would ask them is, if they're familiar with any of the manosphere influencers, the most obvious being Tate. And a lot of them would say, yeah, I've followed, I've would sometimes follow, Tate a little bit. And there's, like I like what he has to say in terms of business, because he has this kind of like little business school online,
Yeah.
but some of them really liked his business model. And
Hmm.
some of them like some of the messages he has that are actually really good messages that more young men
Right.
need to hear about. Stop oversleeping, stop overgaming, get up, have goals, commit to them, do not let them out of your sight and see them through.
Yeah.
And that is something, right? I think we can both agree so many young men need to hear today. And then some of them would say, but and I like even those messages, but when he starts getting off on this misogyny shit, that's when I'm done.
Yeah.
And so that's a part of the conversation that doesn't get discussed at all in conversations about the manosphere. And it's an important one because we never say to boys, why are you there in the first place? For those who are aware of why they're there. And do you, and are you, are you really susceptible to these really awful, noxious messages that don't serve boys and don't serve, girls and don't serve anybody? And I think that, yeah, of course, some of them do. Absolutely. But it's not as rampant and it's far more nuanced than a lot of people realize, which I think is good news. I think if we would
Yeah.
find ways to make boys feel safe and have conversations with them about this, I think we would learn a lot if we would just shut up, let them talk, lead with curiosity. I think we would get a lot more understanding of who boys are today and why they're in spaces like that. I do think you're right. I think that a lot of boys find themselves in these spaces. Part of it is algorithms, right?
That's right.
But another part of it, right? Another part of it is because they are looking for community. One
Yeah.
of the things, right, that boys find when they go into spaces, when they're getting into bodybuilding, when they're going to spaces because they want to learn how to be better at gaming, there are these communities there. And of course, the algorithms there for the manosphere, they're insidious. That's where they go because they know that's where they can find recruits.
Hmm.
That's absolutely part of it, no question. But there's also these communities that boys create, as they're perpetuating, these, I wouldn't say obsessions, but these interests that they have. For older boys, it really has become about body image. And it's a whole another conversation, but it's
Yeah.
really very much about body image and, bulking up, and they're trying to find ways to stay lean, but bulk up with muscle. And that's become a huge community for them. And so what happens is, they go to these places and they're getting the strokes they don't get anywhere else and that feel a lot safer to them, where they don't get vilified for showing up, as a straight male.
Yeah.
I mean, as you said earlier, why wouldn't they go into these spaces if that's what they're getting?
If this is
And
the only
again,
safe place.
neither one of us are saying that we want them to stay in spaces where they're
Yeah.
getting misogynistic messaging or
Yeah.
messaging that is detrimental in any way. Neither
Right.
one of us are floating that idea for a second. But I think we both understand something more nuanced, which is that boys are going there sometimes for really valid reasons of deeper needs that they have that are not being met anywhere else.
Yeah. It would be like putting vitamins into heroin. And then the only way you can get the vitamins, the essential amino acids that you need in order to survive, the only way you can do it is by injecting this heroin. Then you're surprised when people are injecting heroin. You can't be. These are essential amino acids you need. You need to learn that no, you need to make your bed, and you should get up early, and don't get addicted to porn, and all of these other things. You need to learn those life lessons. And if the only people telling you are people who are also wanting to inject heroin in your brains, then you're going to get heroin injected into your veins. Whether or not you think you're falling for that. Like you say, oh, when he gets into the misogyny stuff, I'm not up for that. Is that right? In your heart of hearts, is that really right? Because are you still watching or aren't you? And that's something that you're not likely to want to admit publicly either.
That's right.
Right. And I mean, what we've done as a culture is we've created a situation unwittingly that the only way that the most likely way that young men have to get that message is over here in this heroin injection needle. And we have to give them that message other ways, those messages other ways. We need positive male role models. And frankly, you're not going to find that stuff online. You're not going to find it online because the algorithm is trying to peg you over into this other space. Or it's trying to peg you over into this other really unhelpful space, which is just going to make you feel guilty for being a boy.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's, where boys are right now is very much in a place of, tying back to that idea of independence. They're very much in the space of, I need to figure this out for myself. And this is
Mhm.
something I've heard time and time again from boys and young men.
Yeah.
Just as a quick aside, when I go to a lot of boys' schools and do work at boys' schools, and I'll get a chance to talk with them, and I'll ask roomfuls of them, raise your hand if you feel like you believe that most of the problems that come your way, you really, as an ascending man, you need to be handling yourself.
Mhm.
Many rooms, it has been nothing but a sea of hands.
I can
And
imagine.
occasionally, Sean, there are a few hands that are not up, which is slightly encouraging to see. But it's that notion that they're on their own.
Yeah.
And we also don't really interfere with boys because we feel like, well, I want them to become more independent because look, we know that a lot of them really do need to learn independence.
Yeah.
But the problem with a lot of boys and young men is they think it's again, it's an all or nothing proposition. That if they're going to be independent, it's got to be across the board with everything.
Right.
And they don't understand the nuances of that. I have to constantly talk with my 14-year-old son about learning to ask for help. That there is a strategy to this, and that learning to ask for help can be a form of strength and a form of wisdom, which are two
Yeah.
things all boys and young men need more of.
And the
But it's a type
crazy
of
thing about that is when you're that age, when you're 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, you're in school, there is nobody that won't help you.
I know,
There is
ironically,
no man, there is no 14-year-old boy who could come up to me and ask me for anything that I wouldn't help. I would and I mean, that goes for everybody. If you have a hero, you can ask the CEO of some company. You could probably and you wrote him and you said, "Man, I really love this about you and I really look up to you. Would it be okay if I sat down with you for a cup of coffee sometime within the next couple months?" It would work. Men
absolutely.
want to be there to help other men. They just have to be asked, and yet we never feel comfortable asking.
That's right.
It's
That's
crazy.
exactly right. We don't. We part of it is because we are part of the problem, as I was saying earlier.
Yeah.
We unwittingly think that we're doing boys a good turn, but part of it is that we don't teach them really a kind of really healthy risk-taking independence.
Mm.
We don't do a good job of really explaining to them what really healthy independence can look like and what really unhealthy independence can look like. We don't really break it down for them. We just
Yeah.
kind of expect them to pick it up through osmosis.
Yeah.
And you
Right.
can't expect, as you were just alluding to earlier, you can't expect a boy who's 14 or 18 or even 19, maybe even 20, to pick this up on his own if everyone around him that matters to him, whose validation they seek, all these kids their age, if they don't see them doing anything differently, why would they do it? Because as far as they can see, they're doing the same thing that they've been taught to do. And so it really is this kind of unspoken, it's like a bad sitcom, where you see where like everything is unspoken and you see this character going through the scene and you're just thinking, oh no, he's gonna screw it up again because there's this unspoken expectation. Everybody thinks the other one knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
It's like a bad sitcom. And it's just
That's the perfect simile. That's exactly right. And you just know, like, that it's, or he's like, he's walking around in the dark and he's going to bump into all of these things and everyone's laughing at him and he knows everybody's laughing at him. And what an experience for that person. We're setting it up like that.
absolutely, we are, and we really do need to find ways to really, I wouldn't say hack. I think that's kind of has a negative connotation for me at least. But I
Yeah.
really feel like we do need to find ways to tap into boys and their beings, slash lives. Um, and it's up to us, not them. Too often we think that part of the independence equation with boys is giving them all the room that they insist that they need.
Hmm.
And, you know, when your brain hasn't fully matured, and a big part of that is the frontal cortex,
Yep.
which has to deal with reactivity
Yep.
and making emotional, decisions and not having that long-term vision, horizon vision that I call it, to be able to think about the future. Why would we leave all of this up to them? At
Yeah.
a certain point, we have to say, look, I know you want to be independent. I respect that. But there also are times that me as your parent, we as your parents need to kind of step in and we need to check in and we need for you to work with us.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think is so important is that, A, that we're not really doing that with boys. And B, is that, we also don't make them part of this dynamic. A lot of times it's extremes. We give them way too much rope because we think we're giving them what they need,
Yeah.
or we speak down to them.
Yeah.
Which, as boys are growing older, they want more than anything to show that they can handle it.
Yeah.
That they're becoming these responsible young adults. It is more of a balancing act, and boys also will, even though they will push back and fight. I defy anybody to say that any boy deep down doesn't want to know that some parent or parents have their back, even if they're not willing to come to them and say, all right, let's talk about this. Hey,
Yeah.
I'll give you a
think,
great example.
yeah.
How many times, have we been out in public and we're having a crummy day and we drop something, we're coming out of the grocery store, our arms are full, or we're coming out of any store and the bag starts to fall or something comes through the bag. I defy anybody to say that when somebody comes by and says, let me get the door for you, or
Right.
here, you drop this. I
Right.
defy anybody to say, no matter what age you are, on some level, that does not feel really good. We all need to know that there are people out there who have our backs. And
Yeah.
boys need to know this because they don't get it anywhere else.
Yeah.
Even if they don't respond to it, they just need to know, if and when you're ready, I'm here.
Mhm.
I'm totally here for you.
Yeah. I think maybe that is one of the primary responsibilities of us as parents is they if your son is 15 or 16 and doesn't feel like his parents have his back no matter what, his parents are there for him and have his back, then we failed as a parent.
Yeah.
We failed our son in that way. Now, I would love to drill down a little bit. You're in the trenches. I mean, you mentioned, you have a 14-year-old boy. This is the front line of the war. This is, we're running experiments. We're running this massive experiment on our boys, on our 14-year-old boys in particular, in giving them a device in their pocket that gives them 24/7 access to gaming, 24/7 access to gambling, 24/7 access to porn, 24/7 access to messaging and all of this crazy stuff, rumor mills, all of that stuff. And they're how so and I think, 10 years from now, we'll have it a lot more figured out,
God
but
willing.
you're on the freaking front lines of it. What are the specific tactics that you're using to try to help steer your boy through these times?
Yeah, it's, and we are in these fraught times. There's no question about it. And I do think the stakes are higher for boys than girls, for some of the reasons we've talked
The
about
state,
earlier.
I don't know. It's fair to say they're higher. They're just totally different.
Well, it's a different dynamic. I
Yeah.
think one of the things, the reason I say that the stakes are higher, I don't think for one second, and let me clarify this if it needs clarifying. I don't think for one second that there isn't a world out there that is deleterious to girls and young
Yeah.
women on social
Yeah.
media, especially, because there absolutely, positively 100% is.
Yeah.
The difference, I think, is that they don't go through through their lives thinking all these horrible things that I'm taking in and internalizing that I experience on social media, I've got to handle this on my own.
Right.
That is a giant game changer. So when I say that the stakes are higher, I don't mean that the initial, um, that the initial factors that are really deleterious to them are any different for girls because they're exactly the same. I totally agree with that. The difference is the way that they manage it once they receive and internalize it. That's a big factor that's different. And so,
I'll tell you something else that's different in exactly that same way, and you're 100% right, and it's important to make that distinction. And something else that's different is culturally, we acknowledge that the challenges that girls face in that sense are not appropriate. They shouldn't have to face them like that.
yeah,
But the challenges that boys face, oh, this boy is addicted to porn, it's his fault. This boy is addicted to gambling, it's his fault. Let alone that we put up a casino in his pocket. It's his fault he
yeah,
got addicted to it.
yeah,
And so from a cultural standpoint, it's like we look down on the boys. We treat it like an addict. We treat it the way we treat addicts, right? Is, oh, well, you were so weak that you got yourself into that situation. And we treat the problems that girls face much more like a disease. Oh, they caught this disease. And that is particularly unhelpful for boys on the boys side of things. And so the stakes are higher.
absolutely. It's what it really boils down to, Sean, and this really speaks to what you're really talking about, is that we do a great job of protecting girls,
Mhm.
and we don't feel that we should have to protect boys.
Yeah, that's right.
Because boys ultimately should be able to really kind of pull themselves up by their bootstraps and handle it themselves.
Yeah.
And nothing could be further from the truth.
Yeah.
Um, uh, to give you one really good example, there was a really great study that came out a while ago, which showed that when relationships end, romantic relationships, heterosexual relationships, when they end, that initially girls and young women struggle a lot more emotionally than the male counterparts do, but
Mhm.
they get over it
Mhm.
because they've got that safety net. They learn how to process it. The males, not at all. They might find somebody quickly to kind of replace them in the moment,
Right.
but they don't process, and they don't do the inner work. And that's the kind of thing we're speaking to. It's this assumption. And that really, that to me, that study is a good example of what we're talking about. We assume that because a lot of boys and men will go out and get somebody to maybe have some party time with and some sex with, that they've gotten over it, and nothing could be further from the truth. Because when they get back home, they're drinking by themselves, and they're struggling with the pain and the rejection that many of them really will not get over in many ways.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about. And we have these assumptions that we do a admirable job of protecting girls, as we should, but we need to do a much better job of protecting boys, as we should, and we
Mhm.
don't.
Again, it's yes and, right? I mean,
It's
yes,
exactly.
yes, protect both of them. It doesn't
It just
it
doesn't have to look the
doesn't take
same.
away
That's
from
all.
one to protect the other.
No, it
It's
doesn't, and it doesn't
yeah,
have to look the same.
right.
A great example of this dynamic that we've been talking about, during this time is that, you know, we think we as Americans, we look at suffering in very kind of, very kind of binary ways.
Hmm.
I should have nothing that I should be talking about or complaining about or venting about because the person next to me has really struggled. They have really struggled.
Yeah.
And, there was this this wonderful book called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Frankl talks about that suffering is like a gas in a vessel. No matter how little or how much gas you put into that vessel, it's going to diffuse equally to
Mhm.
all parts of the inside of that vessel the same. And he said suffering is like that. It's that no matter how small, how medium, or how large, it's going to be the same. And one of the things that, is that we think that, well, boys are tougher. They can handle the suffering. We like to tell ourselves that because it really makes it convenient for us.
Yeah.
But we all we have to do is look at the ways of what happens when you see these documentaries of these older boys and these young men in prison, and you hear them in these programs where they're learning how to open up. It's the same story time and time and time again, right? There was bullying, there was horrible mistreatment, there was all these feelings, of deep wells of shame, suffering that they always felt like they shouldn't have to talk about it. They should be sucking it up and dealing with it. this is universal. Doesn't
Yeah.
matter if boys are lower socioeconomic or not.
Yeah.
Suffering is suffering is suffering. And we really need to measure, we really need to level up and help boys learn, how to deal with the suffering that they experience, because they all experience it in these quiet, desperate ways.
So, you know, but another viewpoint to that, and by the way, I don't agree with this viewpoint, and but I'm interested to hear what you would say to it, is that suffering makes you stronger. Well,
It can.
yeah.
It
What
can.
do you, how do you, I mean, so isn't suffering good in that sense?
Suffering, the people who get the most out of suffering, especially when you're talking about really deep, intense suffering,
Yeah.
are often people who have come through the fire,
Yeah.
right? They have come through the crucible, and they've gone through the process. They haven't tried to just kind of like run around it. They've gone through the fire.
Yeah.
And those are people who have worked through all the different angles of their suffering, and they come out stronger because of it. But when people try to do an end run around suffering, and they're not really learning the lessons of suffering, it hasn't strengthened them.
Mhm.
The best example of that, is when you look at Army vets, and they come back, and they have, PTSD, especially these ones who have been through combat. And, you know, when they finally, when well, especially these young men, when they finally get to the point, and you again, documentaries validate all this. It's the same thing like the young men in prisons.
Yeah.
When they finally get to the point that they're able to really open up and not feel that opening up and being vulnerable is a weakness, they learn that it's a strength. That's when they can get on that road to recovery, to really work through the suffering and learn how to find the value and the meaning in that suffering.
Yeah.
I would agree with you that suffering is strength only if we learn how to really develop the inner courage to work through that suffering and to come out the other end through the fire, and to
Yeah.
find the value in what we suffered through.
I I'll add a little bit to that, which is something that made me think of, which is that it's also the case that the world has a surfeit of suffering. The world will provide all the suffering your boy ever needs to become strong. You don't need to help it along. And in fact, on the opposite side of that coin, part of being a man, part of part of learning to be a healthy man is a reflex towards protection. Meaning, if you see something out there in the world where somebody strong is preying on somebody weak, your reflex should be to prevent that, to stop that in some way, to protect the weak person. That's part of what it means to be a healthy man. How is your boy supposed to learn that if he doesn't experience that from you? If you're letting him suffer in ways that you could have prevented. And again, there's a tension here, as there is with everything. There's a tension, sometimes boys need to experience the uh, well, it's not even sometimes, it's all the times boys need to experience the consequences of their actions. But that doesn't mean, but if they're suffering not as a result of their own actions, if they're suffering as a result of societal pressures or these other things, then you should be there to protect them. And it doesn't actually turn them into a man to let them experience that necessarily. The world is going to provide plenty of that.
Absolutely, no question about that. But I would even take that a step further. I would say, Shaun, that even when a boy is suffering, because of not external forces, but of his own doing,
Yeah.
I think that is equally as important to help
Mm.
him learn how to process through
Oh,
what he
certainly.
went through
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
suffering. I think it's, I really do think that we do boys and in turn society a horrible service when we just assume that, well, there's certain kinds of suffering you really need to go through your own, and
Mm.
you just need to kind of suck it up and deal with it. I think that we make our boys stronger when we help them learn how to process through some of the suffering, and then it really kind of helps them build up some of the calluses that they do need for when it will come through, and they can learn to kind of deal with it a little bit better. I
Yeah.
think, to be honest with you, and I'm not ever saying that we should raise boys to be girls, but I think that when you look at a lot of girls and young women who are very resilient,
Mhm.
one of the reasons I really am convinced they are so resilient is because they have encountered suffering, but they've learned how to process through, and they've learned to rely and work and look for that safety net
On the
to help
community.
them through that process,
Yeah.
and it makes them stronger. It's like
Yeah.
that broken bone, right?
Yeah.
That when it heals, it's stronger because of it.
Right.
I really do believe that we really do, boys, and in turn the rest of us, a horrible disservice when we assume that the suffering is good for them and that they should be doing it alone, because it just perpetuates that lone wolf mentality.
Yeah, that's so true. Man, I like that perspective. I've gotta think more about that tension. And, because, I have this reflex. I have that reflex, and it's not all that healthy, come rub some dirt into it, that kind of thing. And, some of that might be appropriate, some of it's not. Yeah, I've gotta think about that a little bit more.
Yeah, no, it's look, I mean, it's no question. This really, this is definitely getting into that whole idea of the independence. It's
Yeah,
a complicated one,
yeah,
because we do, yeah, as as parents, we're not perfect. We do our best to figure out when we need to pull back a little bit, and when we definitely need to be there. Um, I think the important thing that really we should always give to boys is the understanding that if and when you are ready, I'm right here for you.
yeah.
Because that is a gift. I know that sounds overly simplified. It's
Mhm,
not for boys and men, because a lot of us never get that. A
mhm.
lot of us never get that. Knowing that there are people who love them unconditionally and that are going to be there regardless, come what may. Just say, that door is open. I'm here for you. That is not something a lot of boys still get. And that alone is a great start.
Yeah, and it doesn't go without saying.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It
Yeah,
doesn't. I mean, you need to show it too, but it doesn't go without saying. Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, I always like to finish up these conversations with by asking everyone basically the same question, and I put people on the spot, so apologies in advance for that. But the question is, if you could just kind of, I don't know, if I ask you for one principle that that parents of young men should keep in mind when they're trying to turn their boys into excellent men, what would that principle be?
Well, there's a couple things that come to mind, Sean, but I'll lead with this. The more that boys push us away, the harder they push, the more they need us. Because there's so much dissonance within boys. On the one hand, when they're really struggling, and we can see it if we're really looking, when they're really struggling, a lot of boys, a lot of the irritability and the hostility and the anger, and I see this in my 14-year-old son.
Yeah.
I can see this inner fight within himself, this dissonance, where on the one hand, he's really struggling, you know, and wants to be able to talk with his mother or me or both of us together about what it is he's wrestling with. But there's that other part of him, that other messaging he gets from outside of us that tells him, you're weak. You're not measuring up. If you go to your parents, what are you going to go to your parents all the time to help you solve all your problems? That's the other voice on his other shoulder. And so, you know, when we need to let boys know, we need to really, I work with my son on this all the time, and I do it a lot in the car rides to school, because I've been really fortunate in that, is that really through, for many years, we've had to drive him to school, which is a
Yeah.
blessing and a curse,
Yeah.
but because it's a long drive. But I really, at the end of the day, it's more of a blessing, because I've used so many of those days to talk about the kind of things that you and I are talking about.
Yeah.
And I talk about this idea of, with him, I try to make it really, I try to normalize it. And that's a really important thing with boys, is normalizing, and I know I'm covering a bunch of ground here, so I apologize, but I think this is, it's all part of the same thing. It's really important to get boys to understand, that we understand to some extent what they're going through, and that everybody goes through it, because so many boys think they go through it alone.
Yeah.
And to really let them know that the door is open. And the other thing that's really important is that, and a lot of boys don't get this, is that if and when boys do come to us, it's really important that we lead with curiosity, that we not judge and we don't minimize. A lot of us are very uncomfortable with boys when they get not just really angry, but even really upset. It makes a lot of us really uncomfortable, even our own sons.
Yeah.
And it's really important that we understand that boys are paying close attention to the ways that we respond to them when they are upset. They are paying close attention because they're afraid of being rejected. And so it's really important that we lead with curiosity and we just be really good listeners. We just bear witness for them.
Yeah.
And I think that is a really important thing to start practicing for boys, to just keep reminding them. Once is not enough. It
Yeah.
doesn't get through with boys. I'm sorry, it just doesn't. Once is not enough. And I've worked with boys for a long time. Once is not enough.
Yeah.
Um, but we need to keep reminding them at different times that the door is open and that if and when they want to talk, we are here. And that if and when they do come to us, that it's really important that we be really present and and that we not judge, we not minimize, and again that we make sure that they know that we're really listening. And again, like I said earlier, sometimes the best thing we can do is just bear witness because sometimes boys just need that.
Yeah. I when I was in high school, before I could drive, so 8th grade, 9th grade, that kind of time, I went to a school that was 45 minutes away in morning traffic by car, and my mom drove me to school. And it was 2 years, right, of that, 5 days a week. She would drive me to school, and she'd spend a lot of time. It was an hour and a half for her, right? It was a round trip. And that was the best time of my life. It was that connection that we got and the stuff that we got to talk about. It was the most formative, most important part of my whole life. And you're lucky. You're lucky to have it with your boy.
Absolutely. So let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Do you remember if you felt that way in any shape or form back then? Do you remember?
I don't remember.
Yeah.
I
Did you ever tell your mother?
I did. I did.
Good.
I had a chance to tell her before she passed. I had a chance to tell her a lot of that stuff.
That's great.
And we got like I got lucky in that respect because and she was, I mean, she was so amazing. But I'll tell you, there's a story that I can illustrate. I don't think I consciously recognized how important that was to me at the time. But then there was when I was in ninth grade, I was getting bullied a lot by this one other guy. And man, I was just struggling. And at around the same time, my mom was going through some stuff. And so she was struggling. And as a result of my struggles, I was really acting out and I was being an asshole. And I remember this one time that she was kind of snapping at me. She was like, had enough of my stuff, right? And it was on the way home from school one day. And I had lost that connection for that car ride. I lost the connection. And I lost it from stuff I did. But I I thought, I mean, I felt suicidal at that moment. I mean, I was going through such tough stuff and I had severed so important connection that I didn't recognize at the time I needed. And so I don't think I consciously recognized it, but I think deep down I really, really understood because when it was withdrawn for just that one car ride, it it felt like an existential threat to me. It was so yeah, I mean, I don't know. I cherish that time. Your boy is gonna cherish that time.
Yeah.
And you're
Well,
lucky to have
thank you for adding that to the conversation.
yeah.
That's a really powerful anecdote,
Yeah.
Shaun.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time. And for everybody listening, you can find Andrew's work, including Better Boys, Better Men, and Boys Reconnected in the show notes. Take a look at these books, buy the books. I'm telling you, like this is such powerful messages. Andrew, thank you so much for putting it out in the world and having the courage to do this stuff. You started doing this stuff at a time when these messages aren't as well received as they are today. And everybody, I highly recommend diving deeper into Andrew's writing, especially if you're raising a son in today's world. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us on Raising Men. Thank you for watching and listening. Please like, share, and subscribe. And remember that you are a great parent. Raising Men is produced by Fiel Hernandez. This episode was edited by Ralph Tolentino.